Hillary Clinton had at least a quieter week, but still new information about whether her foundation should have disclosed charity, should have disclosed money that was coming in. And now, David, she has a challenger, Bernie Sanders, the senator from Vermont. Yeah. Does this upend Hillary Clinton's
She's
chances?
Finished. She's over. No, it's in some ways. I think Sanders will have a following. There's a yawning need for a real progressive. He certainly is that. And if you look at the candidates who get like youth cult followings, they're like Bernie Sanders. They're like Ron Paul, Eugene McCarthy. They're sort of older guys. They're a little crusty. They seem authentic. They are authentic. And they get weird youth followings. So I think he'll get something like that. But in realpolitik terms, if you're going to have a challenger, you want one who can't win, and that's Bernie Sanders.
I think Bernie Sanders is serious. I love Bernie Sanders for this reason. The first time he ran for the United States Senate, he got 2% of the vote in Vermont. Next time he got 1% when he ran for governor. And he became the first independent elected in 40 years. He believes what he says. Gene McCarthy was 51 when he ran for president. He wasn't old and crusty. But he
seemed old to me at the time.
That's right. You were very young and crusty. But he represents a constituency that has been unrepresented in American politics, and that is the disheveled constituency. And I want to tell you, I am with him. He is not blown dry. The hair is not done. I mean, his clothes are not designer. But he's the real deal. And I'll tell you,
he may not appreciate
where he's going to raise the money issue, and it's Hillary Clinton, given what's happened in this campaign, she may very well be forced to become a reformer, a true reformer on campaign finance because of the Clinton Foundation and Bernie's pressure. And I think he will be somebody to be reckoned with.
He could decimate the dry cleaning industry if people start following his model. No, I think he'll be serious, and he will force her to the left. And we've seen even this week her comments on crime. When it used to be when her husband was running, right, Democrats had to prove they were tough on crime. Now they have to prove they're tough on incarceration. And so you see her shifting in these ways.
Some of you have referenced she doesn't seem to have very stiff competition. Are any of you who want a Democrat elected want Hillary Clinton elected?
She has competition. She's just crushing them right now. I mean,
are any of you worried that if she doesn't have a vigorous challenge, it could hurt her chances of winning? Is anybody worried about that?
I'd like to see an Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden in there for her to run against and maybe get a little more of a race that way.
Yeah. Does anyone else share Bill's wish on that she get a tougher contest to kind of get ready for a general election?
I think Bernie Sanders is going to surprise people. He's going to have a bigger voice than he's given credit for.
If he did have a good chance, would any of you feel he'd be someone more to your liking than Hillary Clinton?
Yes. Yeah, I do.
You both would like him more if he could be the nominee?
Oh, yeah. Right now, whether we like it or not, we have a Citizens United America, and you need to raise a lot of money, and he's just not. There's just so many characteristics where he just doesn't stand a chance.
Christina, do you think anything about Bernie Sanders, or not on your radar?
I don't know much about him. No.
Okay. Is there anybody you think could beat Hillary, or is she for the nomination, or she's unbeatable?
At this point, yes.
Yeah. Charlie, anybody you think could beat her?
No, I don't. Not that I've heard of.
Bernie Sanders is doing quite well in the polls, and I guess we're wondering, we know you're ready for Hillary. Do you think there's any concern there?
No, I think the media is giving Bernie a pass right now. I very rarely read in any coverage of Bernie that he's a socialist. I think everybody wants a fight, and I think they are not really giving the same scrutiny to Bernie Sanders that they're giving to certainly Hillary Clinton and the other candidates. So she's going to win this, and as soon as I think they begin treating him like a serious candidate instead of, oh my gosh, it's so great, we've got a fight in the Democratic Party, I think it will become very clear. Any other candidate that had the numbers that Hillary Clinton had right now would be, talked about as absolutely untouchable, and all of a sudden, oh, Bernie.
Right.
I think it's, I think Bernie is too liberal to gather enough votes in this country to become president.
Yeah, hi, John. Like so many of the presidential candidates in both parties, Bernie Sanders will be campaigning this weekend, as you mentioned, in Iowa, where he trails Hillary Clinton in all the polls taken. And he will be very hard-pressed to duplicate the crowds he generated over 3 days out here on the West Coast. He drew 15,000 people in Seattle, then nearly doubled that a day later with 28,000 in Portland, and then attracted 27,000 people in Los Angeles. They were the three biggest rallies by either party so far this political political cycle. The crowds, made up of mostly aging baby boomers and millennials, ate up the socialists' constant theme of income inequality. But while impressed by the early enthusiasm shown for Sanders, the political experts we spoke with all say these rallies do not show he has broad-based appeal.
Enough is enough from Bernie Sanders, steadily gaining ground on Hillary Clinton. Brand new Fox News polls show that the Democratic race getting a little bit tighter as you look at these numbers. Clinton dropping below 50% for the first time. And then look at Bernie Sanders. He's at 30%. A couple months back, mid-July, I should say, he was at 19%. So a pretty significant move for him. 2 weeks ago, Clinton was up by 29 over Bernie Sanders.
Well, Bernie is now representing the anybody but Hillary crowd. You know, your latest poll shows that she loses to Jeb Bush. She loses to Marco Rubio, and she barely beats some of the other candidates, including barely beating the most obnoxious and uninformed presidential candidate in history.
And that would be?
Mr. T.
What do you make, Amy, of this notion? We're talking about a summer political romance that it's going to fade by the time fall and especially winter rolls around and people actually go to vote for Sanders and Trump. But how do we know these two men don't have staying power?
Well, there is something to that. We don't know that, but we can look back at history and you see, you know, summer is for dating and winter is for mating. Okay, if we want to think about it in those ways, which is, if you look at where we were at this point in 2011, or even a little bit later in the season, you still had a large percentage of voters who not only were they undecided, but they were saying that, you know, electability is not the most important issue for me. The issues are, how the candidates stand on the issues is the most important, or their personality is most important. As you got closer and closer to the election, you saw electability becoming a more important factor. So we know in past places that's going to be true. I think the stronger that Hillary Clinton looks, or the stronger that the possibility of Republicans not winning the White House, the more electability becomes important to voters as they start to go to the polls.
So Tamara, if you ask Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, they're going to say they do have electability. So how do we know they're wrong?
We don't necessarily know that we're wrong. They're wrong. It's that summer lovin', you don't know in the midst of it whether it is the real deal or whether it's just a summer fling.
Bernie Sanders, meantime, still drawing big crowds, David, polling ahead of Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire, a crucial first primary state. Is he looking any more plausible?
Yeah, I'm a little more humbled than I was. I thought he was not plausible at all. And the thought was, sometimes parties elect or nominate a candidate who's unelectable, but not that unelectable. And I still think he's sort of unelectable. The country's just not as far left as he is. But I must say, the evidence is growing, that his support is growing. I don't know if it's widening, though. Whether it's widening out of the white university towns. And if he can do that, then you begin to think, well, maybe. But until he can do that, I still think it's extremely unlikely that he'll be the nominee. But he will continue. He's where the economic heart and soul of the party is right now, and especially among progressives in university towns or places like Seattle. He's right with what they need, and he's got the outsider thing, which is so big this year.
How do you see Bernie Sanders?
I am more impressed. I really am, and have been. Before I became a pundit, I used to work in political campaigns, 3 presidential campaigns.
Oh, so that's what you are.
Yes, no inaugural speeches, but 3 presidential campaigns in 38 different states. And I can tell you, getting a crowd is a lot of work. It's a lot of work. That's why people don't try and put crowds together. I mean, it requires, if you're going to ballroom that holds 500, you've got to have 750 there. Because the last thing in the world you want is a press report that begins speaking to a half-empty high school gymnasium. Senator Brooks outlined his program. And the size and intensity and enthusiasm of a crowd drives press coverage. And it overcomes skepticism in the press, and it enlists people. Bernie Sanders had 27,500 people in the sports arena in Los Angeles in August. A Democratic campaign event in Los Angeles is a party at Steven Spielberg's house hosted by George Clooney. I mean, they don't get 27,500 people. That is remarkable. 11,000 in Phoenix. I mean, 28,000 in Portland on a Sunday. I mean, that is real intensity.
You said this week that the biggest mistake President Obama made was thinking he could negotiate with Speaker Boehner and Republican leader Mitch McConnell. How can you get this very ambitious agenda through, which includes, you didn't mention, an estate tax on those who inherit more than $3.5 million, $1 trillion spent on infrastructure? How are you going to do that without dealing with Congress?
And that infrastructure program, Jake, would create some 13 million jobs. I will tell you how. I have a lot of respect for Barack Obama. He is a friend of mine. The biggest mistake I believe that he made, and I disagree with him on a number of policy issues, but his biggest political mistake is after his brilliant 2008 political campaign, when he rallied millions of people to stand up and fight back. Basically what he said after he's elected, well, I will take it from here. I will negotiate with Boehner and Mitch McConnell and Republicans. 2 points. First of all, these guys never had any intention of seriously negotiating. I think the president has caught on to that. But second of all, the powers that be in Washington, Wall Street, the huge campaign donors, the Koch brothers, are so powerful that the only way we bring about real change in this country, which represents the needs of the middle class and working families, is when millions of people stand up and say enough is enough. They are organized, and that is what I'm talking about when I speak about a political revolution. No president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can do it unless millions of people say, you know what? This country belongs to all of us. Our government must represent all of us and not just a handful of billionaires. It can't be done within the Beltway itself. We need a mass movement, and that's what we are trying to create and are succeeding in creating right now.
Bernie Sanders, he is a self-identified socialist. If he is your party's nominee, would that socialist label hurt the Democratic Party's chances of winning the White House in 2016?
Dana, this election is going to be decided based on what the voters believe is the best choice in their candidate for president, who is going to help make sure that their lives can get better. And any one of our candidates on that stage on Tuesday night, and we're excited and looking forward to CNN putting on this debate with us, any one of those candidates is in dramatic contrast to any of the Republican circus performers that are on the other side. I mean, they're talking about equal pay for equal work and making sure that we can create more jobs and making sure that we can create a pathway for legal status and citizenship for immigrants in this country. Republicans are saying, let's kick more immigrants out of the country. Let's take away health care from women and from all Americans.
So, Congresswoman,
that's the way that American people are going to make this choice.
You believe that Bernie Sanders could beat any Republican?
I believe that any one of our candidates will stand in stark contrast when it comes to the priorities of the American people and how they're going to make the decision on who they vote for president to any of the Republican candidates. The Republicans have been trying to outright wing one another.
Bernie Sanders has made a very important choice to be the outsider within the system. For more than, 30 years, he has stressed two things. First of all, that he was not a Democrat. And he has pointed out to the integrity of that position, that not being a member of a party was a virtue. And secondly, he voted with the Democrats in the Congress, but always stressed that he wasn't a member of the party. Secondly, he defied this American aversion to the word socialism by proclaiming himself to be a socialist. Both of those are entirely legitimate positions. My problem is that having staked out this outsider position, it's kind of hard to pivot instantly now from being an independent socialist to being just a progressive Democrat. That is only a problem because if we have this primary campaign, and here's what I'm afraid of, Hillary Clinton has taken very strong liberal positions, progressive positions, whatever you want to call them. I am afraid there are people who are going to say that she's only doing that because Bernie Sanders spooked her into it. That's not accurate, but inaccuracy is not a barrier to things being accepted. And what you will see is the Republicans saying, aha, we knew Clinton didn't really stand for anything serious, and she's now just trying to win over the votes from that socialist. That's inaccurate, as they said, but very damaging.
Bernie Sanders is electable if he's the nominee?
I mean, voters will have to decide that.
No,
what
but
I was saying in the speech yesterday.
I asked you.
Well, probably not.
You think he's probably not electable in a general election?
Right.
Why?
Well, I mean, we'll have to see who he's up against, right? So I have to make a little caveat there. But, you know, I think on the issue of experience, I think there's virtually no foreign policy experience. And I think that, again, and I have to contrast it with Hillary, that she's putting out real plans that have a good chance of working. I'm not really hearing that from the Sanders campaign.
You know, I think there are two big things for Sanders tonight. Morning Joe viewers know full well who he is and what he's about. But he's got a chance tonight to reach a bigger audience than he's ever reached. And let's see how people like him. The other thing is, don't underestimate the electability, the winnability factor for Sanders. As voters in Iowa and New Hampshire have begun to believe that he could beat her, that he could be the nominee, they're more drawn towards him. He's on stage with her tonight. Remember, we see this in a general election debate sometimes when the incumbent's on stage with the challenger and stands toe-to-toe. If he stands toe-to-toe with her tonight and people can see him within the Democratic Party as a plausible nominee, I think that helps him quite a bit because a lot of his issue positions are to the liking of Democrats. They just don't see him yet in a lot of cases as somebody who can be their nominee. That could change tonight if he's strong.
And one of the things that's been fascinating to me is that so many people would actually vote for a socialist.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Fascinating for me, too. I mean, certainly 20 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, if a candidate in the Democratic primaries, let alone the Republican, said that he was a socialist, that would have been the end of the campaign. But not so anymore. And I think part of that is because the Democratic Party has moved somewhat left. But part of it is that Bernie Sanders has redefined what it means to be socialist.
In what way?
Well, I think when I was growing up, socialist was like right next door to being a communist, right, and the communists were our enemies. I think today Bernie's defined a democratic socialist, which he adds to it, in some ways just as sort of the more liberal part of the Democratic Party,
well,
and a little bit like the parties in Europe. It's a remarkable change.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it's good or bad, but check out this latest poll. Ed was talking about some polls. This was an interesting question. Would you vote for a presidential candidate who was ... A woman, 92% say yes. Black, 92%. Gay, 74%. Atheist, 58%. But then look at socialist on this poll, yeah, Senator. It has higher negatives, at least on this poll.
Yeah, that's a stunning reaction. It only surprises me in relationship to the other factors that were mentioned. So, look, I don't think Bernie Sanders is going to be nominated by the Democratic Party, but honestly, who knows?
Who knows?
But if he is nominated, he's going to have to overcome that self-description as a socialist.
Some of your supporters say you're not electable. They say you're too old. They say you're too far left. They say you don't bother to brush your hair. How do you respond to something like that, where people say, why bother supporting this guy? He's not going to be president.
It's a fair question. Let me answer it in two respects. If you look at polls out there, it turns out that in many of the polls, I am doing better than Hillary is against Donald Trump. We're doing better. Number two, when Republicans win, God forbid.
This is interesting. Western Illinois University has held mock elections that have accurately predicted the winner of the presidential election since 1975. They've been right. Mm-hmm. Who do you think it is? You guys know who it is.
We know who it is.
I read this article. All right, can someone take a guess? How about Natasha? Who do you think it is, Natasha?
Well, I know because my mom told me, so you
That's not fair.
Who do you think it is?
How about the guy next to you? You have no idea?
Who do you think it is?
Just a, he says Hillary. No. What do you say?
I would say Hillary.
He says Hillary.
Wrong.
Bernie.
Everybody in the media knows that Hillary Clinton is going to be the Democratic nominee. There's not much of a race there. All the action is on the Republican side. After all, we're talking about the former First Lady, former U.S. Senator, former Secretary of State, raised a ton of money, and she's a Clinton running against a 74-year-old self-proclaimed socialist. But not so fast. It's always been assumed by those of us who pontificate for a living that Bernie might win an early state or two, but now the polls showing, latest polls, Fox News poll gives him a 13-point lead in New Hampshire. There's a Monmouth poll that gives him a 14-point lead in New Hampshire. Now the Clinton campaign brushed that off because Sanders is from neighboring Vermont.
And you just kind of wonder, you look at that crowd in Birmingham, and you go, wait a second, oh, so
That's where he's weak?
This is incredible.
Well, I would hate to see where Bernie Sanders is strong if I were in the Clinton campaign.
And just to put a finer point on it, there are a lot of African Americans in that crowd that I see. And one of the things that the Clinton campaign says is, you know, Bernie Sanders, he can win in all-white Iowa, he can win in all-white New Hampshire maybe, but Secretary Clinton's strength with African American and Hispanic voters make it impossible for him to win in more diverse states.
Yeah.
It is true that she is stronger with those voters than he is. There's no doubt about that. But the idea that he has no inroads with those communities, and the idea that he could get greater inroads with those communities if he wins the first couple contests, that's just wrong.
Starting with the Democrats, what do we know to be true tonight in Iowa? Jeff.
Well, Gwen, we know that we have a tight race. The race is on. Never mind all the polls. So many polls this year, but watch what the candidates are saying. And I was with Hillary Clinton on Thursday in Indianola, Iowa. And never mind, she was not talking about Donald Trump as she usually does. She had one person in mind, Senator Sanders, again and again and again, from health care to his liberal ideas to foreign policy, as we just heard there. She was squarely focusing on Senator Sanders. You may ask why she's doing this. Well, the reality is her subtle messaging at this hasn't seeped through to voters yet. So her campaign believes that she needs to essentially shake them, in the words of one advisor, shake some sense into some of these Iowa Democrats, they say, and remind them specifically of what Senator Sanders stands for. The problem with that is, though, Gwen, the energy and the excitement and enthusiasm is on the left side of the party with Senator Sanders. So what I was struck by this week, traveling across Iowa all week long with both candidates, is that the excitement and the energy is with Senator Sanders, and people are willing to give him a shot, at least a listen right now. Remember who the audience here is. They're Iowa caucus goers, true believers, you know, the Democrats of the Democrats here, and they like what Bernie Sanders has to say. So what Secretary Clinton is trying to do is trying to stop his rise and convince people that she is the most electable one.
Well, I would say, first of all, just one, I don't buy the premise that she is losing to Bernie Sanders in Iowa. If you look at the godfather of all predictions, who is Nate Silver, the 538 blog, he gives her an 84% chance of winning Iowa. Sure, there are headwinds in New Hampshire. I would also say that the socialist label is something that he applies to himself, right? So the question is, how does that play across America? And what Jay Nixon, who's the governor of Missouri, and Claire McCaskill, obviously a tough state, a middle-of-the-road state, what they know is the same thing that the Republicans know. When in the last debate, the Republicans kept cheering Bernie Sanders on social media, is that the word socialist is a really hard word. Now, I love Bernie Sanders, really. I appreciate the fact that he's bringing out young people. But when you look at that word socialist, the Gallup poll did an analysis of what are the characteristics that people would vote for in a president. Would you vote for a Mormon? Would you vote for a Jew? Would you vote for a Catholic? When they get to the question of would you vote for an atheist, it is, excuse me, a socialist, it is even less popular than voting for an atheist.
So let me take
so
that.
that's why it's an issue.
Okay.